Hey, it's the Productize Podcast. Back with another episode. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Brian Castle. Today I'm talking to Taylor Pearson. He joined me and we had a really great conversation about just the trajectory over the last few years and where Taylor has been headed on his entrepreneurial path, how he started as an apprentice working with Dan and Ian from the Tropical MBA podcast into writing and launching his own book, The End of Jobs, and then on into consulting and coaching. And this year he's focused on a new site that he launched called GetApprenticeship.com. And that's where he matches up businesses with apprentices. There's certainly a need on both sides of that equation. We talked all about that. It was a really wide-ranging conversation. Always great to talk to Taylor and get his unique perspective on things. I think he brings a lot of focus to the table. He has a very systematic systems mindset. And yeah, it was just really interesting to hear how his path has evolved these last few years. And it's always interesting to see what he's up to next. So here it is. Here's my conversation with Taylor Pearson. Enjoy. All right, I'm here with Taylor Pearson. Taylor, how's it going, man?
Good. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for doing it. Great to connect with you again. I've been following your work for a few years now, and you've just been a really interesting guy to read up on and follow all your different projects. I think like many of us, you're definitely one of those people who focuses on a different thing, it seems like every half a year or so. And so I guess my first question for you right now, middle of 2017, what are you kind of focused on right now?
So writing is always kind of a big part. My focus, that's what drives the business for me long term. So do some kind of like platform building, blog posts, guest posts, that kind of stuff. And then I'm working on another book. And then kind of the rest of my time is split between different projects related to sort of monetizing the writing. So I have a course that I'm kind of working with the community and revamping consistently. And then I have kind of a niche job board / productized service that is basically a startup apprenticeship matching service. So connecting remote startups with kind of entry-level sales, marketing, operations employees.
Yeah, very cool. That was probably the thing that led me to inviting you on for this call today was the apprenticeship stuff that you've been working on. Definitely caught my interest. I'm thinking a lot about that for my business as well. So I definitely want to pick your brain about that and see what you're doing there. I mean, before we get to that, let's step back, maybe roll the time back a little bit. And, because like I said, you seem to be one of these guys who like every year, every time I'm kind of like checking in with you, it's like, okay, you seem to be focused on your first book, End of Jobs. And then I heard you talk a lot about time management, which is really interesting, and finding focus. And then now the apprenticeship stuff. I guess I'm wondering, how do you decide where to go big picture from year to year? I mean, how has that gone for you these past couple of years? Is it the kind of thing where like one thing just kind of like leads into the next, or is there a larger kind of trajectory or larger goal that kind of guides where you're going?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's sort of an organic evolutionary process, sort of like, the lean startup thing. If I work on something and then, inevitably, it doesn't go as I planned, sometimes in bad ways, sometimes in good ways, and new opportunities come up and I kind of see those and iterate. So I tend to do, like on a strategic level, I just run everything in 90-day sprints. So I kind of sit down and I'll plan out, this is like actual concrete deliverables over the next 90 days. And then I'll leave it pretty open-ended after that. And then at the end of that cycle, just sit down and kind of reevaluate, okay, what did I learn over this course of this? What went well, what went badly, and then iterate based on that.
That's cool. Cause I tend to, make all these annual goals, especially like, just like everyone else. I do these like New Year's, January 2017, this is the year I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. This is going to take me throughout the year. And then March, April comes around. I'm like, all right, things have changed. Everything is out the window. Now I've got new plans. And I feel like that happens. Like I end up making those 90-day plans, but thinking further ahead, and inevitably things change. So I think that's a really interesting strategy. Before we get into the rest of the stuff, I also wanted to kind of hop back even further. I think the first time I heard about you was on the Tropical MBA podcast with Dan and Ian. I know you used to work with those guys. Is that essentially where your entrepreneurial path began? And can you tell us a bit about that experience, how you started out with them?
Yeah, so I, like many people, I guess maybe it started with the 4-hour work week. I did a study abroad program in college. I was thinking about becoming a lawyer, and there was a guy in my study abroad program. I was like having second thoughts about going to law school, and he was like, you should read this book called The 4-Hour Work Week. And so I read that and I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. You can do all this internet business stuff, and I didn't know anything about it. So I started listening to podcasts and reading blogs and all this stuff. And for the first year, I was actually an English teacher. I taught English in Brazil, and I was sort of doing online business stuff. I would teach mornings and nights. So 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then, maybe like 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. So I had this big chunk in the middle of the day to work on other stuff. And so, this was like 5 or 6 years ago now. A lot of people doing these kind of like AdSense, arbitrage sites. So I kind of started building this network of AdSense arbitrage sites, mostly as sort of like a learning experience. How do you set up a WordPress website? How do you do SEO? All this kind of stuff. So that turned into, I did that for maybe 6 months. I realized it wasn't a great business, but I learned a lot. And that was kind of how I got into working with the Tropical MBA guys and managing their e-commerce stores. Was I said, hey, I've taught on myself all these skills about marketing and WordPress and how all this stuff is managed. I was working at a local marketing firm in Memphis, Tennessee, which is where I'm from, like a web marketing agency, for about 6 months as a project manager, and then ended up moving to do kind of like the in-house marketing stuff with the Tropical MBA guys.
So that position with them, you were kind of doing marketing for their line of physical products that they were selling. Yeah,
we had 5 or 6 companies. There were 2 or 3 main ones, which were, we sold valet parking equipment, portable bars that you like caterers would use to roll out for weddings or like big event venues used, and then, cat furniture. And so I was managing basically the online marketing, AdWords, SEO, email marketing, lead capture kind of stuff for them.
So, I know that was several years ago, but like when you came into that role, did they bring you in as a marketing expert to take over their online marketing and ad campaigns for those products? Or was that kind of like an apprenticeship in a way where they were like, we've got these things working and you can kind of learn on as you go? Or how did that look?
So initially, my background was SEO. SEO was kind of what I was doing with the AdSense websites, and that was the main stuff I was doing at the marketing agency I was at. So I came in and I was mostly just focused on SEO and SEO optimization, and then the role just kind of expanded. So it went from SEO to kind of online marketing more generally, and then eventually kind of became online marketing and sales, and then kind of became just like a bit of everything. So yeah, it was very much kind of an apprenticeship thing where I was just able to kind of expand into different roles in the company.
And then what did you kind of like learn during that time? What did you take with you and how did that like set you up for the next couple of steps that you took on after that?
I think the biggest thing I took away from it is probably the most ephemeral, which is this sense of everything being kind of crazy and out of control and that being the norm. I have this very distinct memory. I was working in the office in San Diego, and it was like a nondescript Wednesday. And we had, I think our second largest customer was like 60 days in arrears, not paying their invoices. One of our manufacturers had found out we were working with another manufacturer to kind of try to diversify our manufacturing base, and they thought we were double crossing them, and they were threatening to shut off production. And like our AdWords account spun out of control and like blew $5,000 in 48 hours or something for some unknown reason. And I just remember walking out of the office.
Typical Wednesday.
Yeah, typical Wednesday. Like kind of stuff, and I think 2 years before that, I would have like freaked out, like, oh my God, everything's going crazy. It was like, yeah, that stuff happens. Sometimes that's what Wednesday looks like.
Right. I guess when you're managing things like that and you go through those experiences and just being involved in a business like that, I guess it kind of gives you that experience so that you can take more risks and go down different paths, just knowing that like anything can basically be dealt with one way or another and you can get through it. Just, you might as well, take some swings and see what happens.
Yeah. I think you gain a sense of your survivability, if you will. Like all these things that I say, that would definitely kill me or that would kill the business. And they don't, you know what I mean? You figure out how to deal with them, and you have, think about how to manage the risk that you're dealing with, and you go on. So it changed the way I thought about kind of like risk and uncertainty.
Yeah. It does get back to this concept of time too. I'm always like, if I'm having like kind of like a down month, I tend to feel like, man, like I'm in this hole, like how am I ever going to get out of this? But then you look back in the last 6 months, it's like, all right, 2 of those were down months, 4 of them were up. Like time just goes on and eventually things resolve, and, just kind of break into the bigger picture, I guess. But, take me to the end of jobs. I know that this was a couple of years ago, and actually you and I and Jordan talked more in depth about this on our other podcast, Bootstrapped Web, around the time that came out. So maybe we'll link that up in the show notes to get the full story on that. But just for listeners here, maybe like in a nutshell, tell me like what is The End of Jobs, the book?
Yeah, so the Tropical MBA guys, Dan and Ian, they had the e-commerce stores that I was managing. They also had kind of an online forum and events business for internet entrepreneurs, people running, small internet-based businesses. And so I got involved with that community through them, and I was at their conference in Bangkok, I guess it would have been 2014, and we were all kind of sitting around the breakfast buffet at this, nice 5-star hotel in Bangkok, because you can do that kind of stuff in Southeast Asia where it's way cheaper. And we're talking about how do we explain to our friends back home this sort of career path or this sort of career trajectory, right? Because you grow up and you have all these scripts that you understand, right? Like you understand the accountant script or you understand the doctor script, go to college, take, these biology classes and these chemistry classes, get this GPA, get this on your MCAT. Like there's kind of laid out. There's a script to follow. But this sort of small internet-based business entrepreneur script is not very, it's no one knew anyone that did that growing up, right? Like it just started happening in the last decade. And so it was kind of this new emerging career script or way you could approach your career. And so the idea behind The End of Jobs was basically to explain what that career script looks like and why I think it makes sense, why it makes more sense than maybe some previous, the doctor, lawyer, traditional career path.
Like kind of making a logical argument for this is actually less risky than it's commonly perceived to go out on your own and be an entrepreneur.
Exactly. It's like going back to the kind of nondescript Wednesday where everything goes crazy. I think there's a real, Daniel Kahneman talks about this in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, on kind of like behavioral biases, these cognitive biases we have. But there's a real gap between what kind of feels emotionally risky and what is actually probabilistically risky when you run the numbers. And so I think entrepreneurship is one of those things that often feels very, very risky. But when your startup cost or whatever, $200 and, some nights and weekends, there's actually very little real risk and a lot of real potential upside there.
Awesome. So what I'm interested in here is take me to that time. You're a really strong writer. You've been writing essays for a while. You're coming out of work with Dan and Ian in this other company. You're on your own. I don't know if it was exactly at that time, but the decision to write a book and to support yourself, correct me if I'm wrong, you self-published, correct?
I did, yeah. So
writing a full-length book, going through that production process and then into the launch process, self-publishing it, how did you go about self-funding that whole process and making that kind of like a business venture and to support yourself at that time?
So it really wasn't a strategic business venture. After I stopped working with Dan and Ian, they very kindly had me on their podcast and sort of let me, present this case study of one of the companies I was managing had grown, I think like 500 or 600% over the 2 years I'd been there. And we kind of talked through how that worked and what I did and yada, yada. And so that turned into consulting stuff. And I was basically doing, freelancing consulting stuff for e-commerce marketing, email marketing, SEO, all that kind of stuff. And I had been writing this website on the side for 2 or 3 years, my personal blog, kind of a nights and weekends project. And Dan Andrews and a couple other people were kind of like, you should go pro on this and write a book. So I basically said, okay, I'm going to kind of keep my consulting stuff going and just hack out a couple hours in the morning and see if I can crank a book out. And, if it does great. And if it does badly, that's fine. I'll go back to doing my e-commerce consulting, marketing consulting stuff. So in that sense, it wasn't super strategic and the book did a lot better than I expected or realized that it would.
So early on, it was just like, yeah, let's try this out, throw something at the wall, see if it sticks, go through that experience of launching a book and see how that goes. How long did it actually take you, from the decision to start to get to launch and then going after that?
So it took me about 9 months. I mentioned I'd kind of run things in 90-day sprints. And so I did 90 days to write a rough draft, 90 days to edit it, and then 90 days to kind of do the marketing, the launch, and the final editing process.
And so tell me about the initial launch and the success of the book over the first year and beyond. What did that look like in terms of meeting, exceeding your expectations?
Yeah, so I kind of I drew up a basic marketing plan and I said, okay, I'm going to execute on this plan and we'll see where it goes. So I did some podcasts or some guest posts and, I had a small email list, I think 300 or 400 people at the time that I announced the book to and kind of just waited to see what happened. And then I think maybe 2 or 3 days after I launched it, it just picked up a lot of momentum. And I think I ended up selling maybe 5,000 copies in the first month, which was more than I expected to sell in the first year.
This is off of Amazon.
This was off of Amazon, yeah.
What do you think triggered that? So 300-400 people on the email list. How does that become 5,000 sales on Amazon? Like, was it just the topic alone just kind of caught fire? Or was there like a mention of it somewhere? Like, how did that go?
So Amazon has a promotional thing you can do where you can give the book away free for 5 days. So I actually launched it for free. And I think maybe the first 3 or 4 days it got downloaded like 10,000 times for free. And it's a bit of a gambit that if it goes well, the momentum from the free can carry over to the paid and you can actually sell more books long term because you've got a lot of the momentum. And so that was basically what happened. I gave it away for free to kind of like my immediate audience and the people that heard about it in the first couple of days and said, hey, if you like this, I'd really appreciate it if you'd write a review and tell a friend about it. And so I think there's just a lot of goodwill, word of mouth that drove the initial sales. And then also like there's kind of a virtuous cycle after a book launch. Amazon's algorithm biases new books. So you get like a little bit of an algorithmic bump in the bestseller list. So if you can get to the top of the bestseller list through word of mouth, it's relatively easy to stay there. And a lot of people people will go to like best-selling books in small business and entrepreneurship as a discovery tool. And so a lot of people found the book just browsing through Amazon.
Very cool. And then how did things go over the, let's say like a year out past the launch? Obviously, like all of your promotional activities being on podcasts and stuff, that starts to taper off, I'm sure. And you're starting to focus on other projects. How does the book stay kind of relevant and selling?
So I'd say after about 6 months, it flattened out. Because, so there was a big bump around the launch that kind of slowly trailed off. And from about 6 months after it launched until, last month, it's been basically flat. Depending on the month, it'll sell like 400 to 1,000 copies. If I do a promotional thing, it'll sell more. Or if it's just kind of ticking along, it'll sell less. But it's been pretty flat for the last year and a half.
Cool. So like what's been the overall impact? Because I'm sure beyond the actual sales themselves, having a book, having that sort of audience grow like that, like what's been the impact since the book came out?
So I think one thing, for me professionally is, I guess there's a lot of, access benefits, if you will. It's kind of like, people talk about like the book is the business card. But if you have a book that's, reasonably well known within a certain space that, people that might not have replied to my emails before would reply to my emails now because they'd heard of me through the book, they'd heard a friend mention it once or whatever. So that was certainly an advantage. I think one big thing for me personally was, writing was always something I'd like to do, but it was always very much kind of a weekends, nights, side project. It wasn't what paid the bills. And this shifted that around a little bit more. I was like, oh, wow, I could do this. I could make a real go at this professionally and write as my actual career. And so that was, for me personally, that was like a really exciting thing to be able to, wow, I could actually like do this thing I really enjoy doing professionally.
I know you've gotten into like, more consulting and coaching and you're doing the apprenticeship site, which we'll talk about, but I mean, is that where the larger trajectory is going for you, do you think? Do you think of yourself as a professional writer or do you think of yourself as a business builder or both, or what do you think?
More as a writer, like a business writer or business author is usually when I introduce myself, that's usually what I go with.
And you're starting a new book.
And yeah, I'm working on a new book.
Can you tell us about that?
It's the title and the topic change like roughly every month. It's one of those things like as I work on it, it keeps shifting a lot. But it's a lot about uncertainty and innovation and the relationship between the two.
Very cool. So where are you at in the process on this one?
So this one, after the end of jobs, did reasonably well. I got contacted by a few publishers and agents. And so I'm sort of treading between whether I want to self-publish or traditionally publish this. So I've been talking with some publishers and agents to put together proposals. And so I'm working back and forth, but I've got, maybe half of a manuscript and half of a proposal put together. And I'm kind of working on them both. Awesome.
So you think this time around you might go the published route?
I'm thinking about it. It's changing very fast in terms of kind of like what the advantages are and how it works. Like on every 6 to 12 months, I feel like things kind of change in terms of what makes sense. So I'm trying to figure that out, what the right way to approach it is.
So tell me about your coaching services. I've been kind of reading through how you promote that on your personal site where your blog is, and under the services section, that's where you can kind of see your coaching stuff, which I always think is kind of interesting. And just from hearing folks who make a living at coaching, I know it's not the only thing you do, obviously, but I assume it's a piece of it. So just kind of tell me about like, when did that actually start as a chunk of what you do, and tell me how you describe your coaching.
Yeah, so it started, I resisted calling it coaching for a really long time. You hear all these like life coaches and you're like, God, I don't want to be labeled as one of those people. So I always kind of refer to it as coaching and consulting. But I mean, really how it happened, it sort of grew out of the consulting stuff. It just gradually, some of the consulting stuff where I was delivering the services kind of evolved into coaching. I think a big part of it for me that I didn't plan this out, but this was how it worked out in retrospect was I was very bullish on masterminds, and maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I started organizing masterminds. So I've been in 2 or 3 masterminds for the last 5 or 6 years, different ones and kind of rotating. But it gave me this really interesting perspective in terms of, between those, I'd seen, 30 or 40 of these types of internet-based small businesses over a multi-year period. And so I could start to kind of see trends and patterns and like this always, people tend to get caught in operations, and they get caught in operations. It means they can't grow the business. And so it leads to this cycle of, you sell a bunch, then you get caught in operations, then you sell a bunch, So there's, like with everything, there's kind of repeating patterns and trends. And so the masterminds I was doing really helped me start to see what a lot of those were. So I think that was a part of it. And I think, another part of it is just kind of like playing to your individual strengths. You asked, do I see myself as a business builder or as kind of a writer? And I much more see myself as, we call it a writer or a strategist. I can get things done, but I know people that are much better executors than me. But I think kind of, I have a bit of an advantage that I think, I have enough, if I have enough data, I can kind of look at the big picture and sometimes see things other people don't and add value that way.
Yeah, I did notice that you have these focus points. I think you broke it into like 4 areas where you tend to focus: like peak performance around like managing time and making progress, operations, marketing and launches, and strategy. So do you find that you focus on those 4 aspects, or I guess like problems to solve, and you have like a standard method for each one that you kind of apply to all of your coaching students, or do you kind of tailor it for each person, or how does that work?
So the way I think about it is I have a toolbox, and it's not, it doesn't have every tool in the world, but it's got tools that are useful to, mostly, $500,000 to $5 million internet-based small business owners. That's where most of my clients are. And I've got SOP tools, and I've got marketing tools, and how you run surveys tools, and all these kinds of different things. And so a lot of the coaching is kind of finding someone and saying, okay, can I take the tools in my toolbox that I already know how they work and I understand how they work? And for the point you're at in your business right now, are these going to be helpful? Can we graph these on to what you're doing in a way that adds a lot of value for you? And so that's kind of what the introduction process is having a call and saying okay, I got these tools, does it make sense for you to use them?
Got it. And then how have you kind of structured your packages, and how does it usually play out with your students?
So I tend to do the packages in 90 to 180 day sprints as well. I try to start with 6 months just because there's a real getting to know you kind of process. And so I think the longer term engagements tend to be better, 6 months to a year, I find is sort of a good length. At a certain point, I run out of tools. You've kind of seen all the tools in my toolbox. But those are kind of typical links for me. And then I will kind of tailor it, so I just started working with someone who's trying to self-publish a book. And so obviously that's very different than someone who runs an e-commerce business that, we're going to be focused on different projects and different initiatives over that 6 to 12 month span. And
so I guess your coaching students come to you as a result of the things that you've done in the past. So you've published a book successfully, you've worked on e-commerce businesses. I guess, is it people from your business network, or is it readers of your book? Where do you think the most leads are coming from for these types of services?
So the majority definitely comes through personal referrals. I think that's just the nature of the industry, because it's expensive, right? And you want to have, when someone and trust says, hey, this person is credible and good at what they do, that's a lot more important. I have in the last maybe year, people that have been reading my site or, read a lot of my materials, starting to get inquiries and work with some of those people. And I think, again, it's just a built up trust thing. It's they've been reading it for 3 years, and, they can, okay, he's here to stay and he knows a few things, and these things might be helpful to me.
Yeah. And they've gotten to know your approach and your philosophy and everything. So how do you balance your time commitment to that piece of what you do? I mean, you're writing a book, you're starting these other sites, and you're coaching clients. So how many clients at a time do you take on, and how many hours per week or per month? How do you do that?
Yeah, so not many, 2 to 3 clients at a time is that's max for me. And everything is done. Usually we meet bi-monthly, so every other week. And then the call will be, depending on how we structure it, 60 to 90 minutes. And I'll spend, half an hour preparing before, looking over all the materials, kind of loading up all the mental RAM, and then half an hour, breaking everything down afterwards. So in terms of how I spend my time, it's not a huge chunk. It's maybe, I tend to write in the mornings, and then 1 or 2 afternoons a week, we'll do the consulting stuff. And then the projects kind of fall piecemeal in around the consulting stuff in the afternoons.
Cool. So let's kind of get into the current year, right? Like your current focus, apprenticeships. This is something that I heard about from you a couple of weeks back. GetApprenticeship.com. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so like we were talking about earlier, the way I kind of got into this whole thing was I basically got what I would call an apprenticeship, which is I went to work for a business that I wanted to learn how it worked. I worked for them for 2 years I started at a very entry-level salary, and the agreement was always kind of like, hey, we're going to let you learn a lot, and you have lots of opportunity to move up in this business. And so it was, I think sometimes the analogy I give is, if you want to go work at a large company, you get an MBA. And if you want to go work at kind of a smaller, fast growing company, you're probably better off getting an apprenticeship, whether it's called that or not. But you're actually going into the fray and working in one of these companies and getting your hands dirty. And, that was a huge, it was a huge thing for me in terms of the benefits to my career and what I learned. Coming out of that, I felt like I was in a better position than had I gone to business school for those 2 years in terms of kind of the opportunities I had available to me. So I was always a really big believer in them. It was one of the strategies I talked about in the end of jobs in terms of like, what's this new career script? One of the ways is kind of to get into these apprenticeships. And so maybe 3 or 4 months after the end of jobs came out, I would have all these readers start to email me and say, hey, this apprenticeship thing sounds great. How do I get one? And then at the same time, I would, scroll through my Facebook or scroll through my Twitter, and I would see business owners I know saying, hey, we have this entry-level marketing role, and anyone that would be a good spot to put it together. And I think it happened like 2 or 3 times in 1 week, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll do something. And so I just put up a landing page and an email list, and I said, hey, if you want to hear about apprenticeship opportunities, enter your email here, and I'll email you when I hear about something. And so for about a little more than a year, that was it was just, I had a friend that posted a job, or I saw someone in my network that posted a job that I thought would be a cool company to work for. I would just fire up MailChimp real quick and, copy the job post in and send it out and say, if you're interested, take a look. And so I basically spent a year trying to kill the project and make it go away so it would stop distracting me from the other things I was working on. And it just kept coming up. People would ask me about it in person, and it kept getting traction despite my basically giving no resources to it. So about 2 or 3 months ago, I was like, okay, let's make this thing legit. So now basically taking that process and formalizing it as right now there's 2 services. So one is just like a job board. Like if you want to advertise for a job, anything else, you pay $200, and we we have a database of these potential apprentices for sales, marketing, operations roles. Send an email to the database. Or we also sort of have a productized service version where we have an internal process that I've used and I've worked with clients to use for how to hire people, and we'll basically run that process for you and just give you a dossier with the 3 best candidates for the position you're hiring for.
Okay, so clearly it's like a 2-sided marketplace. At its core, I guess it's kind of like a job board, but it has these like services layered on top of it in a way.
Yeah, I think that's a fair description.
Interesting. So is it basically the businesses who pay and the apprentices can register? Is it all free for apprentices?
It's all free for apprentices. Yeah. The businesses pay just like you'd pay a job board or a headhunting service.
So tell me more about that process. So for $200, they get their job listed, and then they get their job kind of sent out to your database of apprentices.
Yeah. So we have like a job board where everything gets listed, and we'll pull in like some other positions from other sites as sort of a curation thing. But if you pay, you get kind of a highlighted position on there, and then you get like a dedicated email that goes out to everyone, so everyone sees the job.
So I'm curious to hear more about the productized service that you've layered on top of that. Like, how do you work with a business? How do you kind of bring them through that process of, because I'm curious about this myself, like preparing to have an apprentice, creating that position in your business, advertising for it, hiring them, training them, getting up and running with them?
Yeah. So the first step is really just kind of a mutual screening call to make sure it's a good fit. And I think, apprentice is not a very well-known concept, particularly in the US. And so kind of explaining what is meant by apprenticeship, like this is someone who, one, you need to have a role where there's what I call like upward trajectory. So it's not like they shouldn't be doing the same thing. If you're hiring them to do the same thing for the next 2 years, it's not a good fit. Like they should have the opportunity to grow with the company and be able to move up. That's what these people are looking for, kind of upward trajectory positions. Making sure they understand kind of like how much management and training time is required. If they've never hired at all before, if they've never hired someone entry level, like you're going to have to spend, 3 to 5 hours a week with this person for for the first few months, really getting them up to speed and answering their questions and like, do you understand that's the process? And then making sure they have SOPs that, you're not going to come in and like throw this kid a laptop and be like, make money online and send it to me kind of thing.
That's always been my hesitation with the idea of hiring like an apprentice or an intern or someone like that, or even like a friend or family member or something, because every time I've tried it, I just get sucked into that training process and it eats up way too much of my time. And so I've always resorted to just hiring people who have a little bit more experience. They can kind of come right in, take on the process, and they already know the basic skills and just apply that to our process. How do you kind of overcome that if that's an objection? I don't know.
I think the big thing we're seeing so far is the really like win-win scenario is when you've kind of got someone who's like very much in the position I was when I started, which is, you have a side project. I learned how to use WordPress. I learned how SEO worked. I had some basic, when I understood how to log into cPanel and set up, I wasn't a kind of complete beginner in this. I'd spent maybe 6 months or a year, like outside of my regular job working on this kind of stuff. So I had a sense for what was going on. And I'd also been doing it long enough to go, wow, this is really hard. And if I have to figure out all this stuff myself, it's going to take me a really long time. And so it would be a great deal for me right now if I could go work for a few years with someone that's more experienced and understands how all this works. And I could pay my bills, with my salary for that time, and I'd be in a much stronger position coming out the other side. And then likewise, kind of for the business owner, they can say, oh, well, this person, when I tell them to log into WordPress and upload this post and format it using header tags, they're not going to eyes glaze over and go, oh my God, what does all that stuff mean?
Yeah, I actually like the thing that I'm kind of coming to in my business right now in audience ops is, so we hire a lot of writers, and for that role, we just look for really talented writers who can kind of fit right in and do a really good job there. But then we have this other role for project managers, and they're basically like the point of contact between our clients and our writers and kind of managing the process and internal deliverables and everything. But for that role, they have to be just really strong communicators, really organized, but most of all, they just need to get up to speed on all of our processes and systems inside audience ops. And no matter how talented or experienced somebody is when we bring them on, no matter what, it's always at least a 4-week training process just to get them up to speed on how we do things. And that's just always a painful process, like 2 to 3 weeks of just hiring the person, and then like another 4 weeks of training them to a point where they're kind of at like full capacity, ready to take on management work. And so what I've been thinking about lately is like, we should really have some sort of apprenticeship position where it's like an assistant manager role where they can kind of come into the team on a very entry level basis, do kind of lower level assistant tasks, but be part of the process, be included on a lot of the calls and everything. And so that 2-3 months down the road, when that next PM position opens up, we have people ready to just slip right in and really reduce that training time. That's kind of the way that I'm seeing it at this point.
Yeah, that seems to be the way things kind of evolve. That was very much my story. Like I started doing SEO and I was basically a content writer, right? I was writing, SEO optimized blog posts for these e-commerce sites, which was a very easy way for me to pay for myself, basically starting with month one. And I just I had to do a little research on how the industries worked and all that kind of thing. But it was pretty clear ROI from the business owner standpoint. And then, I was on all the marketing calls and I started to see, started to see other opportunities in the business like that I understood at that point. Hey, actually I could manage the paid traffic and I could, upgrade the email marketing and et cetera, et cetera.
So like, what are the most common types of businesses that you're seeing who could really use an apprentice or like an apprenticeship program if they don't have one already?
So the focus for me, one, I'm doing all remote just for matchmaking reasons. It's a lot, if you're hiring remotely, it's a lot easier to kind of match up people. So that's just my kind of personal focus. You can certainly do an apprenticeship that's in person. But I think the biggest things for these roles is, I mentioned one, like having a growth trajectory. So like a business where it's not like, I just kind of want to keep this thing going for the next 3 years and I've got other projects. Those tend to not be good because you get, you're hiring this ambitious person that wants to come in and grow and make things happen. And they get into this business and they get 6 months in and they know everything there is to do. And it's kind of stultified. There's nothing else going on. So having, over the next 3 to 5 years, we really want to grow. And, I think someone that I placed when I was doing it informally, that they started as just like a very entry-level marketing person for a company that was then, I think, 6 or 7 people. And now they're basically the VP of marketing for the company that's now, I think, 30 people, right? So there's like a very clear trajectory where, they could grow with the company and then basically form part of an executive leadership team. The company I'm referring to has 3 people that started as apprentices that now are, vice president-y type people running their own departments.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually talking to one of our newly hired project managers in audience ops, and the way that he kind of framed himself up to when he was kind of presenting himself to get hired was like, look, after 12 months of me working here, this is how I envision this kind of working out. Either I grow into a larger role at audience ops, or I'm at a position where I can move on to another business. And if that role doesn't exist for me in audience ops, then I can move into another business and kind of leverage the experience that I've had here. And I thought that made a lot of sense, both from my perspective and from his perspective, just to be really clear about like, these are the expectations and where this could go.
Yeah, there's a book called The Alliance that Reid Hoffman, the LinkedIn founder, co-authored. And it's basically just his HR hiring philosophy. And he says one of the things that Silicon Valley does well, or some places in Silicon Valley do well, is you kind of recognize that getting someone that's really good at what they do for, 1 to 4 years, as opposed to someone that's mediocre at what they do for 20 years, you're better off taking, the person that's really good at what they do can, do more in 2 than someone that's kind of mediocre can do in 20. And as long as both sides of the transaction are really honest and open about what their expectations and goals are. It's like, hey, I want to come in and I either want to be able to move up or I want to be gone in 12 months. You can structure the deal in such a way that's like, okay, like let's structure it in such a way that whichever of those outcomes ends up happening, we're both going to be happy.
Cool. So what have you done to take it from just a casual email list or, talking to people one-on-one into what it is at this point, like an actual two-sided marketplace job board and system? Like, who else is working with you on it, and what does your process for running this thing look like?
Yeah, so I have one guy that works with me full-time who manages a lot of it at this point, actually. A big part of the revamp, so to speak, was getting really clear about explaining what an apprenticeship is. Like, the most challenging thing about this, as opposed to, I started a job board for, remote content writers, is, when I say remote content writers, like, everyone gets it. Like, I know exactly what they do. I know why I'd hire them. I know how they fit in. Whereas like remote startup apprentice, unless you've read my book or you're very familiar with the concept, it's a little bit more explain to me what that is.
Yeah. It could mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
Yeah. So putting out content on the site, restructuring the site, like long explainer pages and FAQ pages, and going through and I've been on 20 calls over the last 3 months where I'm explaining the same thing over and over and feel like, when I said this, their eyes lit up. Write that down. That should go in the copy. So that's been a big part of it. Other than that, a lot of it's just been kind of starting to mention it more, talk about it more in conversation. I have an email list from my book and articles, mentioning to them, if you know anyone that's interested, let them know. We're sending out more job opportunities. And a lot of it is just, if I kind of consistently post new opportunities, people sign up, because there's lots of people that are interested in these types of positions. And if they know, hey, if I sign up every week, I'm going to get some cool new apprenticeship opportunity, I'll sign up to get that email.
Cool. So where do you see this thing going? Like, do you still consider it like kind of like a side project for you, or are you making it into a bigger thing, or any like vision for how this might evolve into something else?
I'm not sure. I think, I said earlier, I kind of take everything 90 days at a time and see where it goes. And so that's kind of my philosophy with this. I think apprenticeships, period, as a concept over the next, call it 20 or 30 years, are going to have a real renaissance, particularly in the US. I think they're more popular in Europe and Australia and other parts of the world. But I think the kind of revival of that model is going to play a really big role, because for a lot of career paths, it's just a better fit than kind of traditional or a formal school.
Yeah. And so many people are trying to switch careers or get into a growing industry coming from a stagnating industry. So,
I'd like to be, I think that's a really important development. I'd like to, kind of be a part of pushing that forward.
Very cool. Well, Taylor, yeah, this is always interesting. Obviously, I'm going to keep in tabs on you, reading your stuff. That's at GetApprenticeship.com. Your personal site is TaylorPearson.me. We'll get these linked up in the show notes. Are those the best places where people can connect with you?
Yeah. And then I'm on Twitter. I'm at Taylor Pearson, ME. Love the Twitter.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, thanks again for doing it. And talk soon.
Thanks for having
me. All right. Was that good? Let me know what you thought of this one. Hit reply on any of the emails that I sent you recently. You're not getting my emails? Okay, then head over to my site, castjam.com. You can join my newsletter there. You'll get my best stuff about entrepreneurship, productizing, and more. Also, a 5-star review in iTunes is always appreciated. That'll help others like us come find these episodes. All right, until next time, we get back to working on the business. Later.